Hello everyone and welcome to another devlog video for the Animal Behavior Kit Pro. I've been making a lot of progress in a lot of different areas, but in today's video I wanted to show you my updates on two components. The looking for mate component, the breeding component, and the growing old component. These updates came directly from suggestions from my Discord server, so if you have any suggestions about any improvements that you'd like to see, feel free to join our Discord and leave me some suggestions. So the first thing I'm going to show you guys is the looking for mate component. So I have this doe here and she's just going to be static. And if I select the look for mate right here under the breeding section, you'll notice a few differences. So the original component had a breeding timer, and it had a single male offspring class and a single female offspring class. So the first thing I did is I replaced that with a list of possible classes to add variety. But if you see I expand here the male offspring, it's not just a list or an array, but a map, and the number that you see here is a weight. So now instead of having just a random class picked from the list, either for male or female, we are doing a weighted selection. So think about this as a loot table on an MMO, right, or an RPG, where the higher the weight, the more likely that class is to be picked. So you can now have many different classes for your male and female offspring and add a weight that will determine the percent chance of that to spawn. So for example, a weight of 6 here versus a weight of 2 means that this class is 3 times more likely to spawn than this one. And you get the point, right? So you can add as many classes as you want, you add their weights, and I calculate a weighted percentage, and that is used to select basically a random class. Another thing that I've added was this male to female ratio. So before, the male to female ratio was implicit and it was basically 50%. I'll pick a random boolean, and if it was true, it was male. If it was false, it was female. But now I'm giving you more control because now you can skew the offspring, either male or female. So you can see there a number higher than 0.5 means that we're going to favor males, and a number lower than 0.5 means that we're going to favor females. So this is kind of the male equivalent versus the female equivalent. So let's just test this out. And one last thing is I added this little button here just to test. Instead of having a male and simulating and waiting for them to kind of pair up, it's just a lot easier to press test and see exactly what happens. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just press play, and I'm going to eject from my player here. And now with my doe selected, I'm going to go to the component, look for mate. And now with these settings here, I'm just going to press test spawn offspring. And you can see that it's basically going through the same code as if a male came and bred with the female. And you can see right here, I'm going to pause. You can see that we have between 6 and 8. So the first thing we do is we pick a random number between 6 and 8 offspring, min and max. And then for every single offspring, we're using the male to female ratio to pick whether it's male or female. And then we're using the weight to select which class to spawn or not. So for the males, you'll see that young buck circle B is 6 versus a 2, and the circle B is going to be the albino, as you can see here. So again, I picked these colors on purpose just to make sure that the code was working. So albino here is circle B, and for the females, circle B is obviously the pink. So you can see that in this case, we spawned 4 females and 3 were pink. And for the males, we spawned 2 males and 1 was albino and 1 was not. You can see that I'm also doing traces here. This is something very simple, but I got a bunch of complaints that sometimes these offspring would kind of fall through the floor. So I'm doing a trace here to make sure that they always spawn on top. All right, let's keep going. And of course, I can keep going here. If I change the ratio, let's just stop real quick and change the ratio. So let's say that that for some reason in this species, I wanted females to be more prevalent. I can change the male to female ratio to 20%. And I'm going to click on play again. I'm going to eject, select the doe one more time, go to the component, look for mate, and I'm not going to change anything between 6 to 8. I'm just going to test the spawn offspring rather, and now we'll see what happens. And you can see that they're basically all female in this case, because again, the ratio of male to female is 0.2, meaning 80% chance of female, 20% chance of male. So again, very simple, but in my opinion makes a big difference as far as variety. I know a lot of people have been commenting and even adding their own changes to this component, because honestly, one single class per male and female is pretty limiting. All right, so that's what I have so far. If you have any suggestions for this component, make sure you leave a comment on the video or on Discord. And the second one I wanted to show you guys is the other component, which is the grow old. So usually when you spawn your offspring, you have that offspring with another component, which is the grow old component, which basically makes the offspring eventually grow up and spawn the adult version of that class. So I have a young buck here with some changes for the components on the grow old component. So I'm going to leave him there, and if I go to the components here, I'm just going to go to the comp grow old, and here you'll see that we have some additional things. So the original component had a single timer where you said give me a range, a min and a max value between 10 to 25 seconds, for example. It'll pick a value, and after this amount of time, it'll just spawn the adult animal class in its place. So this little guy will be following his mother, in this case between 10 to 25 seconds. After the timer was done, it'll just spawn a adult version, and at that point it would stop following the mother and just go about their regular routine. So the addition here was, instead of just a single kind of burst, the baby just grew into an adult, I added what I call growth phases. And this is basically an array of structs where each phase you can have its own time to grow. So in this case, it's like 5 seconds, and you can change the scale of the mesh. So you could have several different growth stages where the same mesh, you're just having the scale kind of keep growing, and eventually when it gets big enough, then you spawn the adult class. All right, so that gives a little bit more flexibility. You also have the ability to set a new skeletal mesh. And if you are setting a new skeletal mesh, then you have to specify the animation blueprint that goes with that mesh. If you don't have this, it's not mandatory, then it'll just do the scale. But if you wanted to, you can also change the mesh and add an animation blueprint. And finally, you also have the option of adding new materials. And you're going to see all this in action in just a second. So just for testing purposes, even though it doesn't really make sense, this is kind of a male buck, I basically said that the first growth phase is going to be a doe. So it's going to kind of switch to a female with a pink coat. Again, doesn't make a lot of sense, but I'm just doing it for testing purposes. Then after 5 more seconds, it's going to switch back to a male buck. So I'm again switching back, and notice that the scale of the mesh is increasing. So it's like 0.6, 0.7, and in this case, it's going to have the regular materials. Then it's going to go back to the doe, no new materials, so it's going to use the regular materials here. And finally, just before, it's going to go back to male, but in this case, it's going to use this really obvious blue for the coat. And once all of the growth phases are done, then we're going to go into the adult growth range and pick a random value here, and then we're going to spawn the adult animal. So if you don't want to use any of the growth phases, you absolutely can just ignore it. If I just remove this element, the component will behave exactly like it behaves now. But if you just wanted to add a few extra tweaks to make it more realistic, then that's what you get. So I'm going to go ahead and just press simulate, and let's see what happens here with this little guy. So in 5 seconds, this will switch, there you go, to the doe, and it has that little pink color. And notice that it's growing again. And I have the male, which continues to grow, and now the female, which continues to grow. And finally, we should have a male with blue. There we go, that continues to grow. And after 5 seconds, actually, this is where the growth timer comes in. Between 10 and 15 seconds, it'll switch to the adult, and you can see the adult then runs around and disappears because it can't find the player in the scene since I'm simulating. So there you go. Fairly simple change, but in my opinion gives it a lot more realism, because you can have as many growth phases as you want, obviously with different timers, and even just the mesh scale, I think it makes a nice difference. But you can change the coding, right? Think about other types of animals, maybe birds or other types of animals that have different main colors. You can do that, and you can even change the skeletal mesh. And the last thing I will share is that every single time a growth phase executes, a custom event is fired. And right now, I'm gonna just play it again so you can see. You can then override that custom event. And in this case, all I'm doing is I am printing a print string. So it kind of gives you which phase index you have. But what you can do is you can make a child class of the component. And I'll show you what I did here. And then you can override an event called OV grew up. And then you can add your own custom code. So in this case, all I've done is this is just a child class of the grow old component. I'm overriding this event that gets called every single growth phase. Then because I am including the phase index, which corresponds to obviously the list index here, right? Index 0, 1, 2, 3. I'm doing a quick switch, meaning that I know now that this is going to execute on phase 0, 1, 2, 3. And notice what I'm doing on phase 3 or index 3, which is phase 4. I am actually spawning some antlers, and I'm attaching it to a socket on the head. So one of the community members on Discord created a separate version of that component because he wanted to have the deer kind of grow antlers as they were growing. So I asked him if he could lend me a static mesh for the antlers just to test and make sure that I was covering that use case, and he did. He sent it to me last night. So you can see this is a way that you could do that. You could execute any code. In this case, I'm saying at the very last phase, spawn a static mesh component, set it to the antler, in this case the left antler, and attach it to a socket called socket underscore antler underscore left, and do the same thing for the right. So again, a use case that you can literally do anything you want on every growth phase. So if I had antlers for every phase here, let's say I had like a smaller version of the antlers, I could just copy paste this code on different phases, effectively basically having the antlers mesh change, or I could even scale that if I wanted to. So yeah, that is all I have for this video, guys. I have other things that are in flight, like I said, so look out for new devlogs as I continue to show you guys my progress. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them here on this video. And if you haven't joined my Discord, please join and let me know what you think about the 1.4 update. All right, guys, thank you so much, and I'll talk to you in the next video.